One of the things that informs us about societal engagement is Moses's negative reactions, which were perfectly righteous. How he implemented his disdain for what was happening was completely wrong. Although it's also completely understandable why he did it. That will inform us later in this lesson. All right, so somewhere around the Valley of the Kings in modern-day Luxor, where the pyramids and other things were built, there were an awful lot of folks laboring. Hundreds of thousands of people were put to work to build these structures. Moses was around 40 years old, or so the mythology goes, and he's out doing his thing. He's getting to know his people, but under no circumstances do they assume he is one of them. He is an Egyptian. His entire life is consistent with being an Egyptian royalty. He sees a Hebrew being beaten terribly by an Egyptian overlord, guard, person who is charged with getting people to do what they're supposed to be doing. He couldn't take it anymore. He kills the guard. He kills the overlord and sets the person that was being beaten on free from the abuse that was happening. And he ended up burying the Egyptian in sand, and eventually, within a day or so, runs away. So Moses travels over this Sinai desert in between these several mountain ranges. Now, why is that important? Well, Sharon Hayes lives in one of the 5 boroughs of New York. And so if Moses was moseying, in Central Park, and he had to traverse this kind of area, it was all easy and sunny with the little birds flying around and a couple of hot dog vendors, he could have made that walk probably 2.5, 3 weeks. Problem is, it's desert. Problem is, this area is still Egyptian territory. He's kind of mirroring this path, this existing path that people get to go to the other side of Egyptian territory. So when Moses gets over here, he lands at a well. Most of you know this story. And when he's sitting at the well, 7 daughters of Jethro, one of them being Zipporah, show up to feed the flock. Now, the flock in this particular circumstances would be sheep, but it could have been goats and sheep, or just goats or whatever. And so, but it was a large oasis, a large well, stone structure with a trough in it, so that when you brought the water up, you could give your flock water so they don't die out in the desert. And so Moses sitting there probably resting and happy he's now just over the border into the Midianite range and out of Egyptian territory. And he sees the other shepherds taking advantage of, bullying, pushing around, threatening. Of course, he didn't know it was Jethro's daughters at the time. But unlike his mistake from just a few weeks before, let's assume it took him 2 months, month and a half to get over there. He didn't kill anybody. He just simply ran them off. And he still must have had on his Egyptian garb, because later on, the daughters described to their father, Jethro, that he was Egyptian. So he runs them off. The daughters go back, and they tell their dad what happened. Exodus 2:16-21. Now the priest of Midian, that's Jethro, had 7 daughters. And they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up, did what was right, and he helped them. He practically addressed the issue and watered their flock for them. He didn't just stand up and say, don't you do it. He stood up, meaning he took a stand. He drove away. He got rid of the problem. And he helped resolve the situation in favor of those who were taken advantage of. Verse 18. When they came back to their father, he said to his daughters, how is it that you have come so soon today? Look, most of you have got children. You know that when your children get back early from their chores, and you know there's no darn way they got those chores done in that short amount of time, you're going to bring them over to, okay, why are you back so early? There's no way you did what you were supposed to do. That's exactly what went on here. And they said, an Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us to and watered the flock. So he said to his daughters, and where is he, this Egyptian? And why is it that you left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread. Now, I want to remind you, there's no telephone, there is no internet, there is no video Zoom thing. They couldn't just get in the car and drive back and grab the guy. I could just see all 7 of those daughters rolling their eyes and stomping their feet at their daddy because he sent them back to go do the right thing. You go back and you bring the person that stood up for you, protected you, and resolved the situation, and you bring them back into our household. And that's exactly what they did. Then Moses, after he was brought back, was fed, was properly thanked. Moses was content, he was at peace, to live in the land of the Midianites under the household. That also means under the authority of Jethro. And as it was the custom of the time, Jethro gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses. Now, it's not that simple, because in that particular culture, you are offered, if you're male, as a thank you, you're offered your choice of the women in front of you. And so Moses would have had to pick Zipporah. I want to go back to this now because I want to show you where she's from. You see this Cush area down here in Ethiopia? And the Sudanese folks right here along the banks of the Red Sea? This is where Zipporah's mother and Jethro, her mother specifically, came from. So, Moses was married to an exceptionally dark African woman. You'll see why that's important in a minute. At some point, according to the Bible and the mythological chronology of Moses, after 40 years of living with the Midianites. Now remember, he was already a full-grown man before he killed the Egyptian. According to the Bible, he was 40 years old. The timeline here doesn't make sense, and you'll figure that out in a minute. But the point was, he was a full-grown male when he killed the guy. He was a full-grown male leaving on his own. He didn't take anybody with him over to the land of the Midianites. He married Zipporah, and they had 2 children. His children are mentioned in the Bible. And after a few decades, already a full-grown male, now he lives a whole nother lifetime, has a wife, 2 kids. He goes to Jethro and says, you know what? I need to go back and check on my folk. Now, his folk originally were called the Habiru. In another particular text, they are called the Apiru. It's basically the same derivative. And we know that that was the original name of the Hebrews, Habiru. So he went back to check on the Habiru. He then goes to the burning bush. Where's the burning bush? He goes down here into the southern tip of the Egyptian territory, and where somewhere in the southern tip of that mountain range was Mount Sinai, which comes into play in a minute, and another mountain range somewhere around there, another hillside, he sees the burning bush. The burning bush is Moses is walking along a dry creek bed. He looks off. He sees the bush. It's burning. He hears the voice of God. The voice of God says, take off your sandal. You're on holy ground. He gets anointed and has the authority to go do his mission. I want to point out here, before he goes back and checks on the Habiru people of his tribe, he is placed in front of the burning bush to get God's clarity, sanctification, and authority of mission. I don't want you to miss that. And then he gets up and he goes all the way back over here and he checks on his people up in this area. As the story goes, he finds out they're still not being treated well after 40 some odd years that he's gone. He goes into the household and the royal court and tells the Pharaoh, hey, look, got to let my people go. If not, 10 plagues, you know, all that story. So eventually he, quote, sneaks out, end quote, with some of the mythology, 1 million people. That simply did not happen. It did not happen because if 1 million plus Habiru were snuck out in one night, and there's only about 2 million people at that point who lived in Egypt, I'm pretty sure somebody would have figured out they were gone. What is true is that he took out tens and tens and tens, even more than that, thousands of people. That alone is a miracle. And he traveled back up here to the northern part of the Red Sea inlet where there were marshes. He did not cross the Red Sea. He crossed the Sea of Reeds, which is the tip of this inlet, which were very, very tall reeds, heavy stalks. You could sink in the mud, and that's where he crossed back over with everybody. And where did they go? They end up going back down to where he got the authority of God from, and they traveled there, and he got his marching orders and the 10 Commandments. Now, I want to move on here. Societal engagement, the term societal, not social, even though it's from the same basic structure. The term societal relates to a designated group, large, small, 3 people, 3,000 people, doesn't matter, and it's communal organization. So, many of you have larger family units. If you would design a rope that would completely encompass just your family, that would be a societal designation. How you then organize that communication, culture, religion, traditions, functionality, that all becomes a societal designation. The term engagement here is understood to mean a committed moral obligation to tangibly accomplish something. An engagement has the meaning here of you have been reached out for and authorized and given the authority to get something accomplished. I have been engaged to write an orchestra piece. I have been engaged to paint a picture. I have been engaged to coach this basketball team. I have been engaged to lead this army. Now let's talk about the social gospel and show you what the contrast is. Social gospel is to practically engage through the mission of Christ. Now, before we go on, we got to define what the mission of Christ is. The mission of Christ has 3 functionalities. Doesn't matter how you express it, because lots of churches do it one way, lots of churches do it another way. Some people believe it. But there's 3 fundamental building blocks to the mission of Christ. Number 1, and these are in order, is to demonstrate the practical reality that God exists. 2, to proclaim that God is no respecter of persons and that he loves you in spite of you. And third, that Jesus' immense function of being a self-sacrificial price paid for the original sin of separating ourselves from God. That's the mission of Christ. To practically engage through the mission of Christ to designated groups in ways that bring understanding of the mission of Christ, value of through the mission of Christ, and transformation because of the mission of Christ, for the sole purpose of presenting the whole truth. Now remember, several weeks ago, we taught on the whole truth. And the whole truth are those three things about the mission of Christ. Of a gracious, empowering, and salvational God. Think about Moses doing the wrong thing for the right reason of killing the Egyptian overlord. And a few weeks later, he's now at the well, and he now demonstrates God's grace, demonstrate the empowering of other people, and save those girls, I should say girls, those women, from not a great thing, being imposed on, risking their livelihood, risking their own health, humiliating them publicly. So the second time he did it for the right reasons. He did it because he learned his mistakes. Now, why is that important? In the Bible, Matthew 9:2, 9:22, and 14:27, and Mark 6:50, 10:49. Jesus, before he's getting ready to heal somebody, getting ready to make sure that the folks that he is about to touch, to take away their hurt, harm, or danger, he tells each of them, be of good cheer. Be of good cheer right before needing healing happens. Good cheer is synonymous with telling the people who are about ready to receive the blessings of Christ, have courage, be committed to what's about to happen, and full of faith that what I say I can do, I will do. He made sure that before any kind of healing opportunity would happen, that he would proclaim to those who are about ready to be healed and helped, removed from hurt, harm, or danger, have good cheer, be strong, be courageous. This isn't going to last always. Be committed to what I'm about to do for you, because what I'm about to do for you is going to change your life. It's going to transform your circumstance. And be full of faith that this isn't partial or part-time, or this is completely life transforming. Now, I want to talk about the word courage. I want to talk about the word courage. It says in Joshua 1:9 from the English Standard Version, ESV, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you. This is so important. Is with you wherever you go. Now, he is not, in this particular circumstances, referring to those who Joshua is going to serve. He is referring to Joshua, who's about ready to make a difference in the life of the soon-to-be Israelites. They're going to turn from the Habiru, as soon as they take possession of the land, and they're going to turn into the Israelites. And God says to Joshua, just like he told Moses at the burning bush, you've got your assignment. You know what you have to do. Be strong. In effect, he's giving Joshua the New Testament speech of Jesus. Be of good cheer, Joshua. I'm with you. Have courage. Be committed, full of faith, that you're going to be able to do what I've asked you to do to change dramatically, transform people's lives and circumstances. In 2 Timothy 1 and 7, still in the ESV, for God gave us, Christians, a spirit not of fear, but of power. Now, what's power? That's the authority and the tools. Whenever you see that God gave people power, it is synonymous with you are now under the authority of God, and he has supplied you with the tools to get something, whatever it is he's given you power for, to get done. Not of fear, but of power and love. We teach on this all the time. It is not, here's a muffin, let me give you here's a muffin, hug a tree, pet your cat. It's not that. It is self-sacrifice. Giving to others' needs before your wants. For God gave us a spirit, not of fear, but of power and of love, and this is the most important because it goes back to Moses, self-control. Self-control, self-control. It's part of the fruits of the Spirit, the proof that you're legitimately a Christian, follower of the way of Christ, following you're swimming in the deep end of the pool of faith. But self-control in the Greek here means being self-disciplined. You're not just going crazy. And strategically wise. Moses saw something that was dramatically out of whack. Somebody was being hurt, dramatically so. And Moses felt he had to step in. Glad that he did. But relative to killing somebody, he didn't have to do that. But his anger got the best of them. Societal engagement to proclaim the reality of God in action through the hands and feet of Christ is not an option in the life of the Christian. It is what we do. Now, I want to talk about the people on the far right, my Bible-thumping family. I was a Baptist pastor for a long time. I grew up in a conservative black church. Bible-thumping was not thought of something as bad, but as normative. We would call people to Christ in the parking lot. We would call people to Christ at the local Kroger store. We would call people to Christ I saw my pastor pray with somebody in the bathroom after service because he was too afraid to come down the aisle. We would call people salvation, that initial joining of and calling to Christ is so foundationally important to that segment of Christianity. And you know something? There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong. A whole lot right with that. There'll be more of that. But what is incredibly heretical, the antithesis of what Christ and biblical witness teach us. I have been in almost 500 churches, 18 different denominations, over 40 some odd years of preaching and teaching. And Leslie, I can tell you that I have been 50 churches, if I've not been to one, where I've walked up ready to preach or teach, and there's homeless folks sitting right outside the church because they got nowhere to go, and the deacons or the trustees will shoo them away. That ain't got nothing to do with Jesus at all. Not one thing. I'm not going to give anybody them people money. All they're going to do is go buy drugs, spend it on some booze, go buy themselves a $5 hooker. These are not things that I made up. I've heard all of this nonsense. Bible says clearly, give to those whether you know what they're going to do with it or not. Just give because it's part of who we are. There's a lot of hypocrisy way on the right. Now I'm going to go make the folks way on the left upset. In the 1950s and into the 60s, and it took very much hold, late 60s, early 70s, there was several denominations who took the concept of John Wesley's, the founders of Methodism, and his idea of the socialized gospel, and bastardized it into thinking that it's far more and expansive than what Wesley had in mind. Wesley had in mind of the gospel, the socialized gospel, as a societal engagement of the mission of Christ, and to think more in terms of parish representation so that all parts of life would be affected and led by the mission of Christ. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot right with that. I still preach that to this day, and I try to live that every day. I've taught that to thousands and thousands and thousands of people. The people on the left, not unlike Moses, see something that is inherently wrong. And they will go and want to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, make sure that somebody who wears a boa and sequins and likes to marry their dog gets thought of as somebody who needs to feel the love of Christ. Here's a muffin, pet your cat, here's a hug. That's not the love of Christ. That may make you feel better. That may make them feel better for a time. It may show them that the First Lutheran Church of the Presbyterian Baptist Holy Apostolic is a real nice place filled with really nice people, and somehow that translates into the whole truth of God. That is a lie. I have been to hundreds of far left center churches, and they haven't called anybody to Christ in decades. That's an abomination and heresy. It's not either or, it's both. That's the first thing. The second thing is, the Bible, if you will go look, and I think it's, hopefully I get this right, Romans 12th chapter, 13th verse, it says, do good, especially to the household of faith. Do good to those who are God's chosen children. Churches on the far right, the far left, right in the middle, if they have plenty of money or just a really good committed into missional opportunities, they put missions in their budget. They will send money all over the world. And some church in their community, their roof's falling down. Their pastor has to work 3 jobs just to be able to serve honorably in God's pulpit. People's mortgages are going unpaid. The children are not healthy. They're living in places where you wouldn't want your relatives to live. And these are Christian people, followers of God, chosen of God, and we ignore them every day and assume that's somebody else's problem. Societal engagement, which was the foundational reality of what turned into being the social gospel, was take care lovingly with God's power, with strategic wisdom, those of the faith. Show people that you know the whole truth. And I'm not saying it isn't a good idea to feed those who are hungry, who are not of the faith. Please do that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't stand up for LGBTQ people. Please do that. I'm not saying it's a bad idea to say that, women preachers and teachers in churches are perfectly able and willing and anointed by God, and for some reason other, those ignorant people who use Scripture to their own advantages and their own sexist misogyny, who think that if a woman walks in the room with a uterus, that somehow she's disqualified for doing anything for God. They're fools. They don't know the Bible they say they claim to think of. I'm not saying that you shouldn't stand up for people. What I'm saying is the Bible is clear. Stand up for Christians first. Get your house in order. Make sure that we're healthy so that we can demonstrate the whole truth of God, because that's societal engagement. That is the foundations of the social gospel. And if we forget that, if we forget to call people to Christ, if we forget to do well and do good intentionally, looking for opportunities to help those other Christians, then we fail in demonstrating the whole truth that we are called to do.